Look at the text I put up on the screen. The reason I say text and not words is because these are randomized strings of letters. Realistically, there's not a reason our brains should be able to come up with a message for gibberish like this. From time to time, whether through typos or methodical placement, our minds are able to complete certain messages through the medium of context. This phenomenon is known as the transposed letter effect or typoglycemia, but this word isn't the official coined phrase. Scientists do not back this, it was simply some silly people doing what they do best. Our brains are well developed enough that it recognizes the first and last letter in a word, and theoretically, you should be able to jumble up the middle of the word and still be able to understand it. This can also apply to numbers that look similar enough to the letters themselves. Whether or not you've heard of the exact term or experienced this yourself, this isn't the first time that you've probably had that "what in the name of Bloodborne is going on" moment. Depending on the memory, our past can be spotty, over-dramatized, or completely forgotten if we try to recall it. There's always a multitude of reasons, ranging from too much stress resulting in an abundance of cortisol, or you're simply reaching that age. But don't panic, because other factors such as medication and sleep can also affect these changes. It happens to everyone, and unless you're forgetting how to drive your car on the middle of the interstate, then I think you're fine. Point is that these tricks that our brains play on us happen to everyone, but they always try to reconstruct or fill in the blanks with context. I don't remember anything from when I was in a traffic accident as a child, but if I think hard enough, I can almost vividly remember the inside of the ambulance on my way to the hospital. Using context, our minds follow patterns of experiences we have had before and make what they can from what we have. I would go into detail about what instances these occurrences happen, but then we'd have a longer video than what I had last upload, and trust me, I practically needed 4 fans and an air conditioning unit to help my PC chug along and finish rendering that video. It was a sauna in my room, and heat is basically my kryptonite. All my winter enjoyers, can I get a hell yeah in the comments? Anyways, I want to explore how this process our brain conducts helps us interpret abstract stories from games that are rather cryptic about what they mean, and maybe take a swing at whether or not we can figure out these messages ourselves. This is going to include minor spoilers for Journey, Flower, Gris, Neva, and Gibbons, but if you're fine with that, then let's get into the very first game, Neva. We're going to be going from most grounded to completely up in the air, and this starts with Neva. With no dialogue, this silent narrative follows a woman and a wolf-like creature on their journey to survive the seasons and eliminate the dark evil that lurks within this fantasy world. This is the whole plot, and nothing that the story says from there on really steals any sort of other point in its story. The only word ever spoken is the name of the animal companion, Neva. You're able to call her to your side to direct her to attack, which is a classic mechanic itself, but speaks to its central themes as well. Before we get into that though, let's explore how silent narratives, stories where no words need to be spoken, have evolved from painting in caves to pixels on a screen. Of course, we won't do a deep dive. I'm not about to run a retrospective on caveman drawings and Egyptian hieroglyphics. That take absurdly long, and I don't necessarily want to research that part of history. However, I can tell you that in anthropology, signaling theory is a well-researched hypothesis, and at this point, a field of research that studies how humans communicated with each other in our early ages before a language with solid foundation could be found and analyzed. It's difficult to pinpoint where language originated, but from our knowledge of animals and anthropology, we know that humans used to signal and through which methods they would conduct these messages. Beads and ochre were used to decorate their own bodies to dictate signs such as status one holds in their kinship. Alongside, or perhaps later, cave paintings were another form of communication. We may not know the exact meaning of these paintings, but that's the whole point. In absence of language, it was an abstract way of presenting art or relaying vital information or hierarchy. Throughout history, art and visual representation were flickering in and out of relevancy. But nowadays, we have millions of people studying its significance and producing it. art history takes its place as an important subject for human understanding, while animation is the profession of taking several images and playing them after one another to imitate a fluid motion. It started off with Felix the Cat, Mickey Mouse, and Looney Tunes, then later developed into entertaining stirring of movements with undertones of moral values. Silent messages in media are not a new thing, and when we finally had the technology to record audio alongside our visuals, many production studios chose to stay silent, and that is not any different for game studios. Neva is an amazing example of this, and the silence depicted means something when the only spoken sound is the name of the wolf companion, Neva. This story centers around her and the symbolism of growing up, whether you interpret it in terms of the biological cycle of life or in our human lives as well. Through the seasons, Neva grows and experiences new sensations, eventually resulting in the cycle reaching its turning point and birthing a new journey. We collectively endure this cycle, the one that evolutionary biology has established for us, and we accept that as fact because just like this wolf, it gives us solace and satisfaction to believe in a concept like this. You can surmise this through the imagery alone, and whether or not that message rings true for you is all up to your interpretation. That is the very foundation for abstract games. If the chemical balance of our brains had been any different and we weren't able to work off of context, then this would be a pointless set of events. We are lucky enough that these pointless stories evoke emotion in us, enough so that while the endings of these projects are open-ended, we seek our own closure in this flurry of events. I think I've laid out the basics of what abstract stories are and their purpose in our lives. The point of them is clear, but that doesn't always mean we get it right away. Within my experience, there was a game that I played recently that took me a while to gain my grip of reality with. I didn't quite understand what I thought about it, and I sure as hell didn't want an outside opinion from a YouTuber because, like the free thinker I am, never will I stoop to the level of the masses. I'm talking about This is a story that had me crying in confusion. It's a story following a girl named Gris who explores a devastated world on the brink of collapse. With barren sands and decrepit buildings, the beginning of this game, void of color and voices, really shows you the desperation of Gris after bringing back the hues of red to the world. This is a story of reconstruction, not of just this fantasy setting, but perhaps the scars her heart has. There's plenty of videos out there talking about the visual representation of grief in Gris. One of my favorite videos, by Daryl Talks Games, uses psychology research having to do with color theory that explains what tones are represented by the different colors and why it is that way. Our brains associate these colors with certain emotions and sensations. If you want a more in-depth explanation, I'll link Daryl's video in the description below. For this video, we'll look at how second nature stories have come to be in our lives and why abstract depictions of intrapersonal experiences such as grief in Gris hold an important part in our lives. There's more to the game than visually stunning and aesthetically pleasing spectacles. These sites mean something, and it helps us navigate our own lives amidst our infinitely complicated circumstances. This change of topics may seem ridiculous, but trust me, it's better than the meme video rabbit holes I get into late at night. Within the programming and AI community, and I mean the good side, the ones that actually do research, abstractions are being studied so that they may create learning models similar to the human mind. This makes sense when you understand that much of what we interact with today is based on abstractions. When we are first learning about physics firsthand, we experiment with forces that we know little of. We form conclusions based on our limited experience and call it a day. Over time, you collect more information, but for the longest time, you are working off the patterns you recognize and the educated guesses you surmise from this. The kicker is that real life is such an infinite cobweb of mystified patterns that you'd never be able to fully grasp the entirety of a subject. especially a scientific field that we've only recently gotten a hang of. The programmers who are researching this also make note of literature and film as narrative abstractions of social experiences. Books provide us with detailed stories that we need to project imaginative scenarios of in our minds, and movies provide the visual aspect but lean off of the detailed dialogue. As authors say, it's better to show than to tell. Descriptors and imagery, whether through writing or visuals, is better than blunt and awkward exposition. In the case of Gris, it is similar to films in that visuals are the important part. However, Gris doesn't provide anything when it comes to spoken word. It works completely off of abstractions, because if you look at it with a plain perspective, the story follows a girl bringing color back to the world and fighting off an invader who wants to decimate all the work that this girl has done. There isn't anything to work off of here, but it's because our brains are built the way they are that we work off of context and offshoots of what something could be. There is a difference between the scope of social experiences presented in fiction like this and real-world scenarios. As a novelist Robert Louis Stevenson said, "Life is monstrous, infinite, illogical, abrupt, and poignant. A work of art in comparison is neat, finite, self-contained, rational, flowing, and emasculate." He signifies that these abstractions work because it is not as nearly complex as life actually is. When thinking about the context that Gris works off of, there's only so much a programmed experience can do when conveying its message. It isolates the feeling of grief in its narrative and explores it to only a certain extent. The colors clearly label the stages, and the crescendo towards the end displays the reconstruction of Gris's state of mind and her acceptance of events such as loss. I believe this is another point that works in favor of pointless stories. It takes experiences that we have yet to experience or are lost in ourselves and explains it from a certain perspective. We are often looking for closure or some sort of explanation to our emotions and thoughts. These abstract games are so open-ended in meaning that anyone can connect with it no matter their entirely unique situation. It's the beauty of stories like this and the clear benefit of choosing a wordless narrative. So what happens when a story pops up that has a clear mission surrounding its gameplay and overall scope? Gibbons Beyond the Trees is a simple game. You are a gibbon, an ape in the jungle who is swinging around with their mate and newborn child. You swing from tree to tree, exploring the vast lushness of foliage that surrounds this part of the world. The conflict comes when environmental hazards appear in the form of man-made constructions. People start cutting down trees, stacking up their apartment buildings and markets within these parts of the jungle. Life begins for these people here, but the gibbons' journey does not suddenly end. They continue swinging through the cities that have cropped up, and as a result, they are targeted and captured for the personal use of these new inhabitants. It is a tragic story about the endangerment of gibbons along with their natural habitat. It's a call to action to save them through the tear-jerking story presented here. I believe there's more to this story than just this though. While we can look at the story blankly and say that this is a game about a mother gibbon trying to save her young child, I believe the reason that this plot seems to clutch my heartstrings so drastically is because the gibbons are portrayed as human-like as possible. It immerses you into the gibbon's life by introducing you into its unique method of movement. Then it proceeds to stifle the enjoyment you've been having with its concrete jungle, stirring a distaste within you towards the humans who are burning down and destroying the wonderful ecosystem that these animals have. When you lose your child, the emotions that the gibbon portrays are very similar to that of human grief. Upon seeing these displays of human characteristics, people are much more likely to root for the underdog, like in this example. Perhaps due to our empathy and biological predisposition, our biases tend to favor animals who are phenotypically similar to ourselves. Apes, being primates, are one of the closer species that we can relate to in many ways. It also helps that many people find gibbons very cute, which is another factor that will benefit them in the long term. The final nail in the coffin when it comes to favoritism from humans is how vulnerable an animal is. Due to the rarity and endangerment of gibbons, many people advocate for their protection. This game is a passageway to deliver this exact message and evoke these protective emotions within people. It isn't enough to just take the game at face value. When you reach into the abstractions presented by the characterization of the animals in this game, you understand what you might have done given their circumstances in some other sort of fucked up alternate reality. I'll be honest, Gibbons isn't anywhere near as abstract as the other games in this video. However, I still believe it uses framing of abstract details and mechanics to win your favor. From the coups of the gibbons to the legacy that the mother leaves on the child, the animals are more similar to us than what the initial premise might suggest. In the way that our actions influence the future generations, gibbons are able to pick up on that moralistic nature that gets passed down. This game isn't open-ended. You can clearly see where these gibbons end up and where that leads them into the future. Knowing this, we still require closure in our own lives. What sort of impact do we want to leave in this aspect of the world? Do we become activists or donors to the cause? While motivating us, these stories also give us the stimulation our brains need to determine our newfound aspirations we should have taken up long ago. There's abstraction through the absence of words, but also through speculation of conceptual imagery. Frankly, this next game is the one I'm the most confused about. Flower feels very minimalistic when it comes to every aspect of its formula, from gameplay that asks very little of you to visual imagery that provides minuscule amounts of information to go off of. This project is an art piece that asks you to vibe check it more than anything else. The visuals in Flower range from roaming tremendous plains that span for miles upon miles, to swerving in between wreckage that'll shock you if you're not careful enough. There's ups and downs throughout this game, and throughout it all, you wonder what the overall objective is here. Most of what you can surmise can be summed up in that you're trying to restore life to what was barren or ruined due to greed. It feels like another conservationist theme, similar to the Gibbons game. Funnily enough, the game didn't record correctly the first time around, so I had another chance at dissecting this piece of art. I flew through the grassy environment and survived the perilous surroundings collapsing all around me. Then it clicked. This game is a precursor to what would become a critically acclaimed work. I mentioned that there are ups and downs. These are represented by the state of the world you're immersed in. When you're gliding through the open air, this is a calm, tranquil part of the game. When you're in the midst of the dangerous electricity equipment, these are the moments where we face tribulations. They can mirror the state of our lives. It doesn't necessarily need to convey a certain message, but it can represent a concept. This excursion we've been on, from petal to petal, the legacy of spreading this life through areas of the world that need them is beautiful. It's not because the vehicle of this beautification is flowers, but because there's a word for trials like this that we need to face in any way we can. Whether through storms or oceans, mental caverns or pitfalls, all of us at one point need to make that Flower was used as a stepping stone to get to that game studio's real big hit, Journey. From graphics that blew me away with sheer spectacles of wonder, and shocking horror that I did not expect to feel through the goosebumps that sprawled across my body, this game is the epitome of abstract games. I feel like everything that came before was attempting to create something like this, and everything that came henceforth was a stab at replicating greatness. As suggested in the name, and in my foreshadowing talking about Flower, these games are all about the journey of making that expedition. Dunes of sand that are serene, making up the beginning of the journey. The ease of movement you have when flying over them or gliding upon their surface. The beginning areas of this game mimic the upstart of any expedition you make in your life, whether it's a physical trek or a drive of artistic ambition. These journeys are characterized through a honeymoon phase. Rose-colored glasses fit perfectly onto our faces as we experience new sensations. You hear this a lot when you enter fresh romantic relationships, but it applies to nearly every hobby, pastime, job, or little thing that requires great effort and time. It's only when you've bet your heart on this path that you're thrown into the crucible. Symbolized by the leviathans that lurk in the caverns, problems pop up as if to taunt your willpower. You sneak by and slink through the issues, but sure enough, new mind-boggling puzzles await you. Proceeding through lengthy processing of riddles and problems that are no longer an issue, the final boss that you've been avoiding is still towering over the entirety of the frame you've known. The near last moments of journey are spent shoveling snow with your shins as you body your way up this mountain that you've been aiming for this entire time. You see remnants of others who have attempted to take the same path that you're walking now. All you can do in the decisive moment is to continue forward. It's too late to backtrack as you found yourself in precarious situations that are shackling you down. The issues you've snuck by before appear again. Maybe this time, you take a heavy slamming from these tribulations. There's only so much you can do in the perilous environment such as this one. As you're faced with plains of snow, as icy as the despair you're feeling, the blizzard freezes you over and everything goes blank for a moment. Sometimes, this is where people are left. You become another stepping stone, a gravestone of dreams left in the path of someone else. Another person who is greater than you can learn from the lessons of your endeavor. It's what we see with great scientific discoveries. Apprentices take on what their masters couldn't and solve it for themselves. But maybe it doesn't always need to have a sad ending. Whether through a new spurful vision or closure that you found within yourself, the journey doesn't end there. You take the leap and see for yourself where the fantasies you've envisioned are really like. Maybe it's everything you could have ever wanted, or at this point, it's just a tranquil experience being able to see the fruits of your labor. Any feedback is welcome, and you bask in the sunlight that's stood tall above the gray clouds of your past. Towards the end of it all, you realize that you've made it. Then it restarts, and a new journey begins. There's a lot of ways you can interpret this game. Some would say that it's a metaphor for reincarnation, living your life in the best way you can, battling past pitfalls that seem to ensnare you in order to make your life worth it in the end. Or perhaps this is just a leg of your journey, a segment cut off from the rest, where the end is the turning point. That pivot begins a new derivative that might be wildly different, but the process remains the same. I think that's where all these abstract games take us. They're all journeys that, while taking us through the same situations, lead us to different destinations. We all interpret stories differently. Depending on where you're at, subtle themes might seem more potent than the glaring message at the end. There's only so much you can glean from an experience like this if you're not the one with your hands on the wheel. Games are a beautiful part of our lives. Media is something I will cherish forever. These projects are something we should take in with our whole hearts. Sometimes we can settle for the fun we have with our friends playing live service games, but there's moments where you just need to slow down. Let the abstractions wash over you, and the open-ended conclusion launches you on a unique path of your own. No one can take away the wisdom, feelings, and experiences that you garner. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was definitely a journey all on its own producing this one. I feel like I poured so much of what I enjoy about these games into this project. As always, I would appreciate it if you could like it, share it, and comment something down below. I have a lot of exciting things on the way, such as memberships that are open right now. You'll gain access to exclusive content, so you won't want to miss it. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed every second of this. Thanks again, and I'll see you all later, you cool people.